Hey, what's good, everybody? I'd like to welcome you all to a brand new episode of the Boombox Guru. I'm your host, LB, and for today's episode, we're going to be talking about my top 3 Megadeth albums from the 90s. Been on a bit of a Megadeth kick, but I've mainly been focusing on their 90s output, and I've managed to narrow it down to my top 3 albums from that period. Now, Megadeth is a band that doesn't need much of an introduction. They're one of the big four of thrash metal. Fronted by Dave Mustaine, who has been the only constant member in the band since its inception back in '83. The album has been through countless lineup changes. Of course, everybody knows about the recent lineup change that's happened in the past year or so, which I'm not going to go into details about. We're going to keep it about the music. But for the most part, I think they have a very consistent discography, although there are a few albums in there that are hit or miss for me personally, but they're just a great band. One of the greatest heavy metal bands of all time. One of the most influential bands of all time. They've had a lasting impact on the heavy metal scene, the thrash metal scene as well. Just a great band. One of my favorites out of the big four, and a band that's had a huge impact on me, especially with their subject matter, leaning more towards on the political side of things. Not always, but for the most part, I would say out of the other big four bands, Megadeth is probably the one that leans more on the political side. And a lot of their subject matter is very eye-opening. You know, Dave Mustaine, hate him or love him, I dig the guy. There's a lot of things that he says I do agree with. Some things I don't agree with, but you know what I'm saying? I still think Dave Mustaine's a cool guy. But without any further ado, we're going to get into this video discussing my top 3 Megadeth albums from the 90s. So stay tuned and keep it locked in. Boombox Guru. Alright, so for my first pick of my top 3 Megadeth albums from the 90s, and this one is probably a no-brainer. I'm pretty sure most people probably will have this on their list of their top Megadeth albums in general. But I went with Rust in Peace, released in 1990. And this is an OG pressing. So this is an OG pressing released from 1990. Found this at a bookstore for a pretty decent price, man. Pretty decent price. Original back cover. Original CD art. But yeah. And just a disclaimer, man. Like, make sure you get the OG pressings of Megadeth albums, because the sound on it is a lot rawer and a lot heavier. I'm so glad I have a lot of the OG pressings. But anyway, to continue with this sort of review or me discussing these albums, man, Rust in Peace, one of the greatest thrash metal albums ever released. I mean, to me, this is the record where Megadeth really brought themselves out of the shadows of Metallica. And that's not to downgrade the 3 previous records, but I felt like it. The albums that came out in the 80s, while I do think those records are great and I think that they're classics, I always felt that Dave was more focused on trying to one-up Metallica. To me, Rust in Peace is where he really focused on Megadeth and where they managed to show everybody that they were a force to be reckoned with. And this was also the first album with the classic lineup. Along with Ellefson, who had been with the band since its inception at the time, Marty Friedman is added on lead guitar along with to play along with Mustaine, and then you got Nick Menza on drums. So the classic lineup of Megadeth is solidified, which is one of the best, some might argue the greatest lineup that the band ever had. But they debuted with this lineup and they turned out a true masterpiece, not only in thrash metal but in heavy metal. Megadeth really showed that they were a force to be reckoned with, and I think they lit a fire up under a lot of the other bands, not only in the big four, but in heavy metal in general, man. Because this is a timeless classic that is still continued to be talked about now. It still makes the list of top heavy metal albums of all time, top rock albums of all time. It's just a landmark album that doesn't get old. And so many classics on here, man. Holy War is the Punishment Due, Hangar 18, Five Magics, Take No Prisoners, which is a personal favorite of mine. I really dig how he flipped that JFK quote at the end where he says, don't ask what you can do for your country. You ask what your country can do for you. I always thought that was a ballsy move. I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, whoa, I can't believe he did that. And, Tornado of Souls, Lucretia, Rust in Peace, Polaris. I mean, this album is pretty much flawless, except for that one filler track called Dawn Patrol, which is like an interlude or something. I don't know. It's like this basic bass solo by Ellefson, and Mustaine is given like this kind of quasi kind of rap vocals in a baritone style. I don't know what the purpose of that track was. I've always chalked it up as a filler track. But other than that, man, this is a flawless a flawless album. No all killer, no filler. From start to finish, man, it's just a great record. And like I said, man, this record really solidified them as being one of the big four of thrash metal, man. And it really just set them on a upward trajectory. From here they could go they just had to go further. You know what I mean? And it just helped to establish their identity. Like, no longer was Megadeth that band that Dave Mustaine formed to try to get back at Metallica for kicking them out. Nah, these guys have their own style. They really showed what they brought to the whole big four. So that's why I really think this record is such a masterpiece, and why I definitely had to put this on my list of top 3 albums. Okay, so for my next pick, I went with Countdown to Extinction, released in 1992. And this is also an OG pressing. Show you guys the original CD art and everything like that. But yes, Countdown to Extinction, released in 1992. So this album has a little bit of a more sentimental kind of value for me. The song Symphony of Destruction, which appears on this record, that was actually the first Megadeth song that I ever heard. There was a video game I used to have a long time ago called True Crime Streets of LA, and Symphony of Destruction was in that video game. It would appear in like certain levels or certain parts of the video game. So that was the first time I ever heard Megadeth. And I think around that time was when Megadeth started to release the remixed and remastered reissues of these albums. So I would see these albums a lot at Walmart. And I remember I didn't buy the records at that time, but I remember I would just stand there and look at the album cover and everything like that. So it does have a bit of a special place for me. But with Countdown to Extinction, man, Megadeth, this record isn't thrashy like Rust in Peace. For the most part, it's more of like a modern, like heavy metal album, more of that 90s type style. You got to keep in mind, this was 92. So by this point, Metallica has dropped the Black Album, which that record pretty much changed the landscape of heavy metal. A lot of bands started to change their style. Also at this point, grunge, alternative music is really the flavor of the day. So a lot of heavy metal bands are trying to figure out where they fit into this new landscape of music. And Megadeth was no exception. They did go a bit more commercial, just slightly on this record. Not too much of the thrash elements on this record, but it's still a heavy metal record. It's more melodic, which I dig, because I like when heavy metal bands can be melodic, but at the same time be heavy, which is what they do well on this record. And I still think the album's pretty technical. I mean, you gotta understand, this is still the classic lineup with Marty Friedman and Nick Menza. So still a lot of great music is being put out on this record, man. So many great classics on here, like Symphony of Destruction, like I just mentioned, Skin of My Teeth, Foreclosure Over Dream, as well as Sweating Bullets, which is another fan favorite amongst Megadeth fans and stuff like that. But even though it's not as thrashy, it's still, in my opinion, kind of technical in a lot of ways. Songs like High Speed Dirt still have like thrashy elements in some cases. This Was My Life, which is another favorite of mine on here. Psychotron. Let's see, Ashes in Your Mouth, Captive Honor. For the most part, man, I gotta say that this is a solid record. Well, more than a solid record, man. I would say that this album is really all killer, no filler, man. I don't really feel like there's any tracks on here that you could deem as filler songs. I feel like every song on this album has its place. And just a great record, man. Like I said, it's not as thrashy as Rust in Peace, because by this point, 1992, thrash was pretty much on its way out. But it's still a great heavy metal record. Still heavy, a lot of punchy riffs, great solos. Dave Mustaine, his vocal performance is really enhancing. Is really getting better at this point. But just a great record all around, man. I really dig this. Like Countdown to Extinction, man. Another one of my personal favorites, man. Really enjoy this record. So number 2 on my top 3 Megadeth albums of the 90s. Countdown to Extinction, man. Great record. All right, so now we're down to my last pick of my top 3 Megadeth albums of the 90s. And for my last choice, but certainly not my least choice, I went with Euthanasia, released in 1994. And this is also an OG pressing as well. Show you guys the CD. I like that CD cover art of all them, like, kind of playing air guitar or whatever, man. Man, Euthanasia this is honestly one of Megadeth's most underrated records. And I don't know why. I guess because it was released in 1994 and, alternative and grunge was still pretty much the flavor of the day. Although I would say 94 is probably like the last year where it was really at its highest peak. But Euthanasia is such an awesome album. I'm finding it kind of hard to generate the words to explain it, man. But for the most part, the band kind of follows the similar formula that they did on Countdown to Extinction. But this time around, I think the band was a lot more heavier. Like, there's a lot more heavier, more beefier riffs on this record. And the guitar solos on here are just blistering, man. They're just so amazing. You even get to hear Dave Ellefson's bass work more prominently on this record, man. Like he's really a great bassist, man. Like he's providing like a lot of groovy licks with his bass work, man. So I really enjoyed that, man. And Nick Menza, man, he's just a beast on those drums. I mean, he's a monster just pounding away on here, man. But the greatest highlight of this album is Dave Mustaine's vocal performance. Euthanasia has to be Dave Mustaine's best vocal performance. When I went back and listening to this album to prepare for this video, I was listening to these songs, and song after song, I was just listening, and I was like, man, is this really Dave Mustaine? Because let's be honest, as much as I enjoy Megadeth, as much as I like Dave Mustaine, he's not the greatest vocalist. He's never been considered like a top tier vocalist. I mean, when he first started Megadeth, he didn't even want to be the vocalist. He wanted somebody else to be the singer, but they couldn't find anybody that fitted what they were doing. So he started singing. I don't know what Dave was doing at this time that was really enhancing his vocal performance, but man, he needs to go back to doing it. I mean, I'm not trying to downgrade what he's done in recent years, but of course he's older now, so he can't do a lot of things he did back then. But it was just amazing. I mean, he was hitting notes, he was hitting keys, he was reaching pitches that I've never heard Dave Mustaine do on any other albums before Euthanasia or after Euthanasia. Maybe on United Abominations. I think that's the only album more recently, if you want to consider that, because that was like 2007. That's like, what, 15 years now? But that's the only other album that I've heard him come close to having as good of a vocal performance as Euthanasia. And even United Abominations doesn't even quite hit the mark like Euthanasia. I mean, he was just hitting notes that I've never heard come from Dave Mustaine. And this is just an all around amazing record. Again, I would consider Euthanasia to be another album, all killer, no filler. One of those records where with each song, the album just gets better and better. And I just enjoy records like that. You hear one song that's so great and you're like, man, there's no way this next song is going to top it. And then the next song tops that, and then the song after that tops that one. And it's like, whoa, this is just amazing. Great record all the way through. Great consistent songwriting. Just everything on this album is just wonderful, man. And it's crazy how this album is just so overlooked. I mean, they did have a big hit with the song Et tout le monde, which was, I think that was the only single that was released from this album. That was a big hit for them. But even as good as that song is, it's weak compared to everything else on here. I mean, you got songs like Addicted to Chaos, Elysian Fields, The Killing Road, Black Curtains, Victory, the title track, Euthanasia, Blood of Heroes, I Thought I Knew It All. All of these songs are they're just remarkable. And I don't know, Euthanasia just needs more attention. People need to go back, review that album more, because it's just great. I mean, at this point, Megadeth was on a roll. Although, unfortunately, you know, that road will start to come to an end after Euthanasia a little bit. But still, man, this lineup of Megadeth was just really on a roll, man. You know, personally for me, I think they just churned out 3 classics right here back to back. But Euthanasia, man, great record. Actually, you know, even though Countdown to Extinction has more of a special place for me, as it was the first time I really heard Megadeth, I have to say that Euthanasia is probably better because it's just a lot more heavier. They still manage to attain that more mainstream accessibility, but they keep it heavy. Like the riffs on here are just beefy and more punchier and in your face, man. And the solos are just, whoo, the solos are just amazing, man. I can't imagine what it was like to hear these songs live. You know what I'm saying? I bet that was just such an amazing experience, man. But yeah, Euthanasia, my last pick for my top 3 90s Megadeth albums. Definitely check this album out. Highly overlooked, highly underrated. And if you can, be sure you get if you find a physical copy, make sure you get the OG pressing, man, because just to hear the heaviness and aggression and those solos from the more rawer a production style of the OG pressing, it's just amazing. It's just out of this world, man. So, man, definitely check out Euthanasia. All right, so that's it for my top 3 Megadeth albums of the 90s. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what your top 3 Megadeth albums from the 90s would be by hitting that comment box. You know, just hit that comment box. Let me know what your top 3 Megadeth albums from the 90s would be. Also, I want to take the time to thank everybody that's watching the videos. I appreciate it. I never expect anybody to really come across these videos that much, man. So whatever views that I get, I'm appreciative of it. I thank everybody that's watching. Big shout out to all my new subscribers as well as all my old subscribers. You know, if you enjoyed this video, please do me a favor, hit that thumbs up and give me a like. Helps with the algorithm. Also, make sure you subscribe. Hit the bell so you'll be notified anytime I drop new content. And as always, I hope everybody has a blessed day and a blessed week. And love, peace, and music. Peace out.